For part 3 of the overview for Great Marches of the American Revolution, we're going to look at the different counters that will be in the game. Now, keeping in mind, all of this is playtest art created by me, and the use of a little bit of AI here or there, or just doing some clip art. So let's go through at first the track markers, which you have up here at the top. Then you have your markers for entrenchments. These will be front and back to cut down on the number of markers that you'll have. So working and abattis 1 will be front and back. Abattis 2 and entrenchment will be front and back. Then you get to your fatigue markers, which those of us who play GCACW are used to, with little notes of how fatigue impacts movement by individual unit. We'll look at that in a later video. This SP marker is out of date. They are now just one number, so you don't have to worry about if the counter's been turned on accident or anything like that. They'll be front and back with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And then you have just unit information markers down here at the bottom that will be within the game at different periods, such as destroyed supply, used supply, out of command, disruption, out of supply, and then these wing movement markers, which will be used on the wing movement track down here at the bottom, just for you to keep track of what your movement roll was to start the turn. And then we get into what is probably the most important part, which is the units. These group of units over here on the left are what leader counters will look like. I've got 3 different examples, 2 from the Continentals and then 1 from the British. Green and Cornwallis are what would be wing leaders. They have their wing ID noted by the circle on their counter. Now, a artist may decide to do something different with that, maybe a line across the top, but nothing that we haven't seen before. A color identifier to help identify what wing they're in. Now, how Washington is different is the little star at the bottom of his counter tells you that he is an army leader rather than a wing leader. Now, the army leaders are still over a wing. I'll explain the order of battle here in just a minute and how that works. But the only thing slightly different about them is the command structure, and that star tells you that they are the army leader rather than just a wing leader. Leaders have 4 values on their counter, going from left to right. The top left corner is their command range, which is the number of hexes from the commander excluding his hex, which puts a subordinate unit in command. So you have 6 for Washington, 4 for Green, 4 for Cornwallis. The army leaders have a longer command range because of how the command structure is set up, which we'll talk about in a later video. On the right side, top right hand side, you have the combat modifier, which represents the leader's effectiveness in combat. This number is used often as a die roll modifier to the CRT. And if this unit needs to use its morale for anything, then that is what they would use for their morale. The bottom right number is their movement modifier, which affects whether or not the units in a wing have extra MP, positive, negative, or 0. There's no examples of negatives here, but that does come into play in some games, such as the Monmouth campaign with Charles Lee. He has a negative. This can only be used by the leader himself or by units that start their movement next to or adjacent to the leader or stacked with the leader, and it can only be used by units within that leader's wing unless it's the army commander, such as Washington. Then any unit in the army can use that. The last number is the bottom left, which is similar to the bottom left number on our regular units, and that is their starting SP. Now, the series rules say this is also the largest number of SP that unit can ever have, unless it is the Monmouth campaign, where there is a campaign-specific rule that allows them to go over in terms with the Continental Army, because they have an army reorganization date, which is a historical time when they all reorganize. That is the only game so far, or campaign so far, where units can go above that number. Now let's look at the units, or the combat unit counters. Now, they still have lower level leaders as their names. So you have Maxwell here, Matthew here, Irvin here, and they only have 2 values on their counters. The bottom left, as I mentioned before, is their starting SP. Now SP is approximately 150 men per a strength point, and then they have their morale. The morale serves as a DRM when rolling for activation if they are out of command and they want to activate on their own, or it also serves as a DRM when trying to retreat before combat. It basically represents each unit's effectiveness in combat, and I try to keep that as historically accurate as possible. The circles, just like on the leaders, identify what wing they are in, and then some special units where it says LT in the bottom right, that tells you that that is a light infantry unit. They have some special abilities that we'll cover in a later video. So how does the order of battle work? So you see a lot of names, but what's behind the name? So for example, Maxwell was a light infantry brigade that operated during the Philadelphia campaign. All of these counters are within the Philadelphia campaign. Irvin was the 2nd Pennsylvania Brigade. So you're going to notice most of these are at the brigade level when looking at the continental side. Now, where do I get SP for the leaders? Oftentimes that comes from, for example, in Washington, that is his personal guard. Artillery is abstracted within the combat system rather than identified by individual counters. So the men that would have been operating under Knox's artillery brigade are added into Washington starting SP. Green is the 2nd Virginia Brigade. So you'll notice all of these have something behind them, even though it's just the leader of a brigade or a certain unit. They are actually representing something historically within the order of battle. Just for informational purposes, Matthews representing the Foot Guard and the 1st and 2nd Battalions that was operating under General Howe during the Philadelphia campaign as well. And Cornwallis, there's no dragoons within the system either, at least not yet. That may be put in as a campaign specific, but in the campaigns being used so far and overall in the Revolution, I did not think they were impactful enough to include them as separate counters, especially operating at 150 per 1 SP. So they are wielded into different groups, such as Cornwallis here is excess units from dragoons. That's why his number is so much lower, but the overall strength of the armies does stay historically accurate. So that's a little bit idea of how the counters work, what counters are included in the game. Now, counter density on the boards does stay down. The last component I wanted to show was if you want to keep track of fatigue and SP on the map, you can, but there will be off-map displays provided. Now, again, this is just playtest art, something I threw together for playtesting, but you will be able to keep that off the map if you would like to keep the counter clutter down while playing your game. Thinking about the back of the counters, that will just be flag identifiers for each side. If you want to play with hidden movement, you're able to do that, so you don't know which unit is which. But other than that, there is nothing else going on the back of the counters. So that is everything to do with the counters of Great Marches of the American Revolution. We'll start looking more into the mechanics and how the game plays starting in the next video. Thanks again for watching.